Hello. We're back. um, so one of the things that authors are always asking, maybe it's in our comments or Instagrams, all of that, is can we go back to an agent after they reject us? Or
just after. We're going to talk about a lot of different situations when you think maybe I'd like to go back to the agent.
yeah, it's a good conversation because there are so many different points where you might cross paths with an agent and then wonder, should I go back to that person?
Yeah, and I think as agents, we have so often had situations that an author said, "Oh, thanks for the feedback you gave me on that rejection. I found an agent afterwards." And you were like, "Well, why didn't you send it to me?" "Oh, I didn't know if I could." So I think we want to make sure we don't miss out on those things too.
Yeah, so maybe we'll start. Why don't we start from the beginning, right? Like
Yeah.
start with the query, or maybe running into an agent at a conference, getting feedback, anything like that.
Yeah.
I would say anytime that you meet an agent in person, it's worth sending a query if you like them. Like
Yeah.
that door is always open. You can always send it, find their query manager, their email for queries, however they accept them. And if they're open to what you're working on, send the query. It doesn't
Yeah.
hurt. Let them consider it in a more official fashion than in your face or in passing or in a quick conversation. Give them the query letter and let them read it and make a decision just like they would any other query letter.
Yeah, I feel like anytime you've done revisions, especially if it was based on or triggered by something an agent said to you, the door is open to requery. Listen, especially with Query Manager, it's not a big deal for us to say no. And I think I would rather have the chance to see it and say no. And I think you, as an author, would rather have the chance to say, at least I tried and now I know for sure, rather than always wondering, should I have sent it to them? I mean, for me, even if it's just a simple rejection, but for some reason it really like changed things for you, I would like a second chance at it. I mean, I can still say no, but I would rather have that than see the deal done and be like, wow, I read that book and I really liked it, but I passed on it and I never
Especially
got the second chance.
if we're giving some level of feedback. A lot of agents don't do that ever, let alone very often. So if they're giving some level of feedback, there's something that they enjoyed. You just don't know. And
Yeah,
I like every stone unturned. So I
agreed.
want to know before I make a big decision like choosing who I'm going to work with. And I don't think a query will ever hurt. And you can, if you're going back to an agent after feedback, you can just put in the query letter like, you saw this, you gave me great feedback, I really appreciated it, I wanted to give you a second look at it to see if it's something that might work for you now. Super simple.
Yeah, plus, to be honest, if you got feedback and it resonated, it already gives you a hint that you and this agent sort of would potentially work well together.
Yeah,
Because understanding what an agent says and their feedback can be that's a win.
especially if it's like a critique or like a pitch or something at a conference. I think
Yeah.
that's great. The way I approach every one of those paid critiques or anything, it's like I would edit a client. So
Mm-hmm.
you're getting the full sense of how I would give you feedback if we did work together. And if you like that, you might as well explore it.
Yeah. So what if you got multiple offers of representation and you picked your agent, but maybe over a few years things changed, maybe your agent left the business, maybe you decided you made a wrong choice. Can you go back to the agents who had previously offered, presumably at this point with a new book, but maybe it's the same book, maybe maybe the agent, I hope not, but it does happen, maybe the agent you picked never really went anywhere with it or ghosted it or something like that.
I think the door is always open. I mean,
Heck
that
yeah.
they love the book, they made an offer. I can't think of many clients that I made an offer on that went elsewhere that I wouldn't reconsider a second time.
100%. And
So
actually, I believe just in recent months, different agents at BookEnds have taken on a few new clients who that was pretty much the situation. Listen, I very rarely, if ever, have any sort of grudge against an author who chooses another agent over me.
it's
I'm
the
not
name of
gonna
the game.
I'm not gonna say I don't feel sad and have hurt feelings. Like if I
Sure.
make an offer of representation, I go all in when I make that offer. but it doesn't, but I don't hold a grudge. Listen, it's a business decision. I don't know all of the reasons why you made that decision. I don't think it's a slight against me. I just think for various reasons that only you know, you connected with another agent in a way that you didn't feel that connection with me, or just maybe it was a close choice and that agent won out by a margin. I don't know what it is, and it really doesn't matter.
I feel like, you know, you take that person on because they were the right person at the time, right? Like, I mean, you signed with that agent because they were the right person at the time, but that
At the
doesn't mean they're
time.
gonna be the right person forever.
Right.
And that doesn't mean you made a wrong decision, right? Like, it just means that you felt for where you were with your career, your decision making, that other agent was the right fit. But if you're looking for a new agent, I feel like that's one of the first places to start, are the people that you know really connected with your work. And maybe this time is the charm, right? Like, you just don't know. And I think it's worth, I wouldn't say you only have to go back to them,
No.
but I would probably still go to your top list, but I would include them in your top list of agents. Like, I would go right back to them.
Listen, if the conversation that you had with an agent resonated enough with you that you feel you want to go back because that really would be the person you would choose now, then why would you do yourself the disservice of not doing that? Like, you should absolutely give yourself a chance to have the agent that you feel is right for you. And again, I think the biggest thing in this whole process to remind ourselves is um, the worst that happens is somebody says no. I mean, I am flattered that anybody wants to work with me, you know, and we had a meeting the other day, and Jessica Alvarez said in the meeting, she goes, I went for no. And I think that's something authors should just latch onto. Like,
There's so much self-rejecting in querying.
oh,
I think it's a really vulnerable position to be in, to write your book and write a letter and just sort of solicit all of this responses from people that don't really know that it's coming. Like, I think it's a hard thing to do,
mhm.
but it is still your career. So I think you kind of, like you said, you have to go for no. You have to just sort of abandon all of that self-rejection, and don't let, you know, the submission guidelines aside, but if you think this person's a fit, like, don't let your own fear of querying them or going back to them or how will this look or they're going to hate me or whatever, don't let that get in the way, because you're not making the best business decision for yourself.
Yeah. And I can't imagine an agent holding a resentment simply because they offered representation and you in a different, that would be weird. I mean, I suppose people have all sorts of different
I'm sure.
personalities. I'm sure there are people who do it, but I think it's weird because I think that, you know, business, it's an important business decision for you. And it's not like you called the agent and said, you suck, you're terrible, so I'm gonna go with this other agent. Because then you wouldn't come
Right.
back.
Okay, so now if you parted ways with an agent and you regret it, or, you know, maybe you're looking for, maybe that agent parted ways with you and you're looking for new representation again, would you go back to that agent?
I think this particular one is going to depend, because it really is going to depend on why you parted ways. So I had a client years ago. We had tried really hard to sell her suspense and had gone everywhere, and we had no luck. It was a really dark suspense. I loved it, but as we may have discussed on YouTube in the past, I have this penchant for dark books, and they're sometimes tough to sell. That was the case with this. She decided to switch over to YA, and I didn't do YA. So we parted ways, and she went off and actually sold and published 2 YA books. Now, a few years later, the market had changed. There were some new publishers on the scene, and she called me up and said that she had sent her original project, the adult project we had worked on, to one of these new, smaller startup publishers. And she really felt like I had put in the time into this book and I should be the agent who would represent it. We parted ways on obviously very good terms. I still loved this book. I loved the idea of getting it out there. And so I took it on, and we ended up selling it to a big 5 because things had changed, and published a few books together that way. So yeah, I think it's a possibility. Now, if we part ways because our visions don't align, you know, maybe she continued with her YA career and wanted me to take her on for YA, it still probably wouldn't be right. But maybe I had switched what I was doing and was doing YA at that point, and maybe I would be interested. I also think this is sort of one of those don't burn your bridges question. You know, if you part ways with your agent and you sent them this sort of list of all the reasons they thought they were terrible, I don't know why you would want to go back to them. And certainly, probably they wouldn't want to see you back.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think if your agent parts ways with you, I'm not necessarily sure I would want to go back.
Yeah. But what if
I-
you did? You know, what if your agent parted ways with you because you had switched over to middle grade and they weren't doing middle grade, but
yeah,
then you
that's
switched
different.
back to what you were writing before?
I think if it's about genre and like going separate ways, that's one thing. But I think if it's about disagreements, I just don't know that I'd want to go back.
Yes. And if it's disagreements about working style and, you know, different workings, because sometimes relationships don't work because there are two different working styles, right? There are things that maybe the author expects or the things the agent expects that the other one doesn't see as how it should work. That's probably not going to change.
Yeah, I think what I would say for this one is make sure you're valuing yourself before you make that decision to go back. So if you're going back because you have no other choice, you're not going back for the right reasons. If you're going back because you're like, I don't know, like now that I've seen what's out there and I've worked with other agents, like they were just the better fit for me, perhaps they'll take me. That's a different story. But I think if you're going back because it's like, well, let's try again, I'm not super inclined to that. I think there's a reason that we parted ways, and I think it'd be foolish to ignore them.
Yeah.
On either side, whoever parted ways, right? I'm not saying I would hold a grudge. I don't think it's a grudge, but I think it's like sort of like don't go backwards in a way. I just don't always think it would work. And I think it could get awkward. But if you're going back with like genuinely because you want to work with that person, I think I would be open to it. But it, like you said, just depends on the history of the working relationship and how everything unfolded, particularly in the end, because I think that's important. But I wouldn't say that the door is closed, maybe like slightly ajar.
Might just be harder to get it open.
Yeah.
I do have a question about this one though, because I know in another video, in an older video, we had discussed switching agents as an agency and whether or not that was a possibility, and that is somewhere in our archives. But I don't think we discussed it in terms of what we're discussing here. If you part ways with an agent at an agency, can you then go back and query another agent at that agency? Is that door open? Yeah, we see it a lot too, but it doesn't usually.
I think it's weird.
I think it's, well, and you also have to keep in mind that that new agent is going to call your old agent immediately because we're there. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't call your old agent if they're at a different agency, but certainly in the same agency, I'm going to be like, hey, James,
especially when you
client
consider,
just queried me, what's the story?
Yeah, especially when you consider like how closely at least BookEnds works together, and I know other agents work as closely as we do with their teams, but like we sort of know all of the falling outs.
We already know the tea.
Yeah, so we know the books, we know the tea, we know the deal terms, we know it all. So I think we're making a far more informed decision, and I feel like if you're parting ways with our colleague, it's also weird for us and the colleague too. Like, I don't care who you are, you'll probably have a weird feeling about it. So I think it would be harder. I don't think the door is closed. I don't think, if, like you said, if the agent leaves, I feel like it's a completely different story. But
the agent leaves, it's a different story. I think if the your genre has changed dramatically and the former agent no longer does or doesn't do that genre, that changes things a bit.
So we have a situation on our list where you worked with a client for nonfiction years ago. And then when Tracy joined, Tracy signed that client for their Kidlit work. So I feel like that's not super weird. Like that could work.
No, but I also think the way we worked together in nonfiction, it was sort of one book. And then we really
The
lost
nature of
contact because the author wasn't writing anymore in that area. So when the author came back, it was completely fresh and new and totally like a different author.
yeah, so I don't think it's impossible, but I think if you get like part ways with an agent and 2 weeks later you query their coworker, weird.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good point. I definitely don't think you can do it on the project you were working on with the previous agent,
No.
but you could do it down the road with something new. But I do think it's a tougher way to get in the door. I think you're going to have a
An
harder
uphill battle.
chance at it.
Yeah.
Huh?
It's like an uphill battle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a fun one. Now, what if you were rejected by an agent, but now you have an offer?
On
Be
that
it,
same book?
yeah, be it publication or on another book, be it publication or representation. Would you go back?
Not if it was the same book I was rejected on, unless it had had big revisions. If it had big revisions, yes. So if I revised it, it was basically a new book. I still really wanted this agent. Maybe I hadn't had a chance to query them on the revised manuscript yet. Yes. Then I would say definitely go back, make sure you know, let them know you revised it and see what they say. If it hasn't changed, it's the same book, or they rejected the query. I don't know. I mean, you could get an agent who will sign on just because they can get the deal if it's a publisher offer, which, isn't a bad thing. You can get somebody to work on your contract. But if it's the exact same book and they had read the book and passed, I would think you would want an agent who felt a little bit more strongly about the book.
Yeah, and I think it would, excuse me, I think it would also depend on how, like what the pass was too. Like if it was a gushing pass and then you got an offer, maybe I'd feel more open. If it was a form pass and then you got the offer, I'd be like, well, you just didn't connect with it. Why would I come back to you?
Right.
I have had situations where I passed and then they did get an offer and came back to me and I was a little more open to it. But I also think that was more about my list and less about the books, and also about the query and less about the books. So I think that it doesn't hurt to try, but again, I would consider like value yourself. Do you really want to go back to that agent if they passed just like super simply? Because I don't think that that's necessarily the best fit for you if they passed on the book.
But then again, go for no.
We can always be proven wrong. I think that's the thing about all these situations.
Yeah.
Every one of them, like we're just waiting to be proven wrong.
But if you really know that's the person you want, if you really want to try it, if you really want to just give an agent another chance, for some reason you feel the need to do that, go for it. Go for it in any of these situations. If it's, I mean, to be honest, it's very flattering if I've passed on somebody or they were a former client or any of those things and they want to come back to BookEnds or want to come back to me. Like for me, that's a good sign. I mean, there's a lot of respect there and I am open to considering anything. But when there's a history there, I think any agent's going to come at the book a little bit differently than they would when they know nothing or have no connection with you previously. But that history could be as much as we met at a conference too.
Yeah, I agree. It's not a black and white situation. Like there's no right or wrong. There's no simple way to do it. So I think, like you said, if your gut's telling you this is it, yeah, just kind of go for it.
You got to go for it. And just remember, I think sometimes authors, well, we all do, right? All humans, we get in our head what people might think and all of these other things. And the truth is, all that's going to happen is you're going to get rejected. I do not spend that much time thinking about the authors in my query inbox beyond reading the query and getting excited or not getting excited. I'm not sitting there thinking, I can't believe this person queried me again. I don't. I'm excited to get every query and see the possibilities.
Yeah, no, I agree. So the door is always open, I think is what we're saying. The door is always open. Decide whether you really want to walk back through it. And then if so, go for it. Try it out. The worst that you can get is another rejection. And if you're going to be a writer, you got to get used to those.
Yeah, you do.
Okay, so we hope this was helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We post videos every Wednesday, and we'll see you back here next week.
Bye.